My name is Sarah Treyrup, and I'm the Head of Technology at UNEP Copenhagen Climate Center. We at the UNEP Copenhagen Climate Center have, in a collaboration with the UNFCCC Technology Mechanism, the Technology Executive Committee, and the Climate Technology Center and Network, we're pleased to present to you the 2024 Climate Technology Progress Report, Unleashing Renewable Energy for Ambitious NDCs. It takes stock of where we are at in enabling climate technology development and transfer. And we this year have a special focus on tripling renewable energy capacity. We focus on how we move from identified needs into implementation technologies. We focus on what we might see as quite simple questions. We focus on what progress is being made, what has enabled it, and where are the gaps. And building on this understanding, how do we better enhance climate technology implementation? We'll start our program for this event with remarks from Mr. Stephen Minas, who is the Vice Chair of the CTCN Advisory Board. After that, I'll invite Helene de Koning to provide a scene-setting presentation. But without further ado, I would like to invite you, Stephen, to take the floor. Thank you.
Welcome, dear colleagues. It is a delight to be able to welcome you to this event, both those of you who are in the room and those of you who are joining online. And we're here today for a very important purpose. The Climate Technology Progress Report has rapidly become a landmark on the agenda every year in terms of setting out a roadmap for how we can achieve the goals of the Paris Agreement and the even more ambitious goals that have been set by the parties in more recent years. And specifically to this report, tripling renewable energy capacity by 2030, as Sarah mentioned, an incredibly ambitious but also an incredibly necessary task which lies before us in just a few short years. And from the side of the CTCN Advisory Board, we could not be happier with this collaboration with UNEP-CCC, but also with the Technology Executive Committee. This is a very important way for the CTCN to contribute to the dissemination of knowledge, not just knowledge arising out of our work and technical assistance, but certainly knowledge which is relevant to that work, and might I add, knowledge which will inform future technical assistance and future programs and collaborations. So on behalf of the CTCN and its advisory board, I do thank UNEP-CCC and their team. I thank the tech. And I would like to acknowledge from the CTCN side our former Director ad interim, Rajiv Garg, who played a very important role in developing a strong working relationship with UNEP-CCC. If we look at this report, it is for just over 70 pages, remarkably comprehensive, covering technology, needs, financing, all manner of important aspects to rapidly scaling renewables. And from the side of the CTCN, we were very pleased to contribute a case study from technical assistance in Burkina Faso using a pay-as-you-go model to expand the uptake of renewables for more sustainable and more productive agriculture. So we see that there are a number of sectors, indeed there are many sectors, that will benefit if we achieve this goal of tripling renewable energy capacity by 2030. Let me close by doing the obvious, but thanking the authors who contributed to this remarkable document, as well as the reviewers and everybody else who made this a reality. I apologize that I cannot stay. I have to return to the far less riveting world of climate negotiations, but I wish you all the best for the remainder of your discussion, and I hope to catch up in your discussions later on. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Stephen, for taking time to come here and join this event and provide your opening remarks. And I would say from our side, we really appreciate the strengthened collaboration with the CTCN Advisory Board, of course also with the tech, in the production of this report. So thank you very much. So Without further ado, I would actually like to invite perhaps all of our speakers to join us here at the scene or at the podium. So please, Helene de Koning from University of Eindhoven. I would have Elizabeth Gilmore who is an associate professor in environmental engineering at Carleton University. We have Lucas Somavilla, who is from the University College of London. And we also have Deborah Lee online with us today, as she was unfortunately not feeling too well, but still really eager to join us at this session. So this is really much appreciated. So Helene, if I may simply just go ahead and ask you to take the floor, and I think we would just go for your slides. So please, Helene. Helene is part of the steering committee from the report, and as many of you know, she's also an IPCC lead author, and we're very much looking forward to the presentation from you. Thank you, Helene.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sarah. Also, thank you for all the work you've been putting in this report and in many other activities around technological change in the UNFCCC. Really delighted to be here and to be allowed to set the scene. And also say a couple of things about chapter 2 in the report, because the authors of that could not be here today, which is at the same time a bit awkward for me because I'm presenting other people's work, so it's their work, not mine. But first on setting the scene, I think we are not talking enough about system transitions in this space here. When we talk about technologies, we like to talk just about what the hardware is and increasing capacity, as we've seen in the COP28 decision in Article 28, but not about everything around it, which is just as important. And already in the 1.5 degrees report of IPCC, of which Debbie Lay was also an author, we highlighted that we need system transitions in the energy sector, in land and ecosystems, in urban and infrastructure systems, and in industrial and material use systems. And we need those for mitigation, but also for adaptation alike, because we're also facing a changing climate in these systems. And I'm deliberately saying systems and not sectors, because in these transitions we will see a shifting of what a sector actually is and how we organize things. And in order to make these system transitions happen, also in the 1.5 degrees report, we noted 6 different enabling conditions. And if you strengthen these enabling conditions, you can make these system transitions happen. We're talking about multi-level governance and steering, developing institutional capacities. We're talking about behavioral change across the board, including public support for measures, but also lifestyle changes. Technological innovation, of course, policy instruments, and also changes in the financial system. Now, all these things need to be strengthened in order to make these system transitions happen, including the renewable energy capacity tripling that we want based on the decisions in this venue. Now, and the Climate Technology Progress report goes into all of these enabling conditions very nicely, and that's why I'm so happy with this report. I think this is really the only space here where we're seriously talking about these system transitions. So the report really clearly, and now I'm getting into the area which I didn't do myself, so I really want to acknowledge the authors of this, especially Blanche Ting. And the current pace of renewable energy needs to be, installation needs to be accelerated rapidly. We're seeing that the installed capacity is increasing rapidly, but not rapidly enough yet in order to make this target. So there's a lot of good news to report on renewable energy, but it's at the same time not fast enough. If you look at solar and wind capacities, they grew 170 and 70% respectively in the past couple of years. So this is really good news. The cost dropped, and this is of course a major driver. But at the same time, we're not seeing the same kind of deployment everywhere in the world. We're seeing that developed countries are implementing this way more rapidly than developing countries. And the report goes into the causes of that as well. We'll hear more about that later. We also see if we want to triple renewable energy capacities, that different regions are doing this in different ways according to their national energy plans. And we're seeing that, for instance, the MENA region and also sub-Saharan Africa, because they're coming from a lower base, need to do more and are planning to do more. But they can only do that if they are enabled with these enabling conditions. Otherwise, you will develop renewable energy in a system that is not made for it. And this is really key in order to make that happen. This graph shows you the share of tripling renewable energy by region according to their own national plans as assessed by IEA and by this report. So, and different regions also have different challenges there. Some combine it with combating energy poverty very much, others have different drivers. So, if we're talking about the more technical system around that, we're also looking at supportive infrastructure, grid integration, energy storage technologies that enable things, advanced control systems, and don't forget, this is not just about supply, this is also about demand, because a variable renewable energy system also requires a different demand structure. So, and all this depends on various factors. So if I wrap it up, we're seeing that different regions, even though there's a global goal of tripling renewable energy capacity, different regions are scaling their renewable energy capacity at different rates. And they also have different means of benefiting from the cost reductions that we are seeing. And some regions are not yet benefiting enough. This, whether they can do that, and this is highly necessary, depends on a number of other factors except for just cost reductions. It depends on innovations, bringing down financing costs, which is different from technology costs. People, and also IPCC reports about unit costs and not about the financing costs, and we'll hear more about that later. It depends on capacity building, and it depends on system integration and infrastructure, and this report will go into all of this. So it's really about supply, but also about demand, about flexibility, and the system transition for renewable energy will have to incorporate all of that. So on behalf of the steering committee, I guess, this is a super important report. I think it's really a landmark. The negotiations are using it and to make the point of what needs to be agreed here beyond what we agreed last year. And I think this is a really important conversation to have. So thank you again to UNEP CCC and to all the authors. And I look forward to the rest of the event.
Thank you so much, Helene. It's a great pleasure having you here and also to support the work on steering the report in the right direction. So thank you very much for that. Now I would like to invite the rest of the speakers here, and we would have, first of all, we would have Deborah Lee, who is joining us online, and I hope that she is well connected to our event here. So Deborah is the Chief of the Energy and Natural Resources Unit of the, hi Debbie, I can see you now, that's really great, at the UN Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean. And Debbie is here to present the feasibility assessment chapter, and we would hear much more from Debbie on what do we mean by feasibility assessment and how has this methodology been developed and in which context are we applying it here in terms of the climate technology progress and the feasibility assessment. So perhaps without further ado, Debbie, I would like to invite you to take the floor. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Good day to everybody. Really sorry to be missing you there in person, but hope to catch up with all of you over the coming days. So just like Helene mentioned a moment ago about system transitions, the multidimensional feasibility assessment was also born out of the special report on global warming at 1.5 degrees C. Just to give a little context, the report was done also considering poverty alleviation and achieving the SDGs. So we needed to go a step beyond the usual economic and technological feasibility that is commonly done for projects. So we included 4 additional dimensions, which are sociocultural, institutional, environmental, and geophysical. So, as in the previous CTPRs, which I've been lucky to be a part of, we've been applying the feasibility assessment to different system transitions. For example, last year was the urban one. In terms of this year's report, as Sarah mentioned about the goal of tripling renewable energy, this chapter also helps to align national policies to achieve the goal of this tripling renewable energy capacity by 2030. So institutional capacity, along with other policies, regulations, and standards, need to be strengthened. As we will see, the institutional dimension was consistently the weakest throughout the different technologies. There are many feasible technologies, such as solar and wind, but there are also gaps when we do regional assessments. And there's a handful of technologies that meet both mitigation and adaptation goals and have significant synergies with the sustainable development goals. For example, with relation to some of the renewable energy technologies and resilience and reliability of these systems. But there is also a note to say that despite the goal of tripling renewable energy capacity and the feasibility and effectiveness, this will not be possible without other considerations such as updating grid capacity or implementing more energy storage. There's regions in the world where, despite the potential to do more renewable energy, there's nowhere to feed it into. So the next slide, please. Here we can see the feasibility assessment results for adaptation, in which we took resilient power systems, energy reliability, water use, efficiency, and smart grid digitalization. And as we can see, the bottom bar of institutional is where we have most, the lower feasibility, which means significant knowledge gaps in evidence, or where we have significant barriers. And in most cases, it's the barriers. But overall, energy resilience and reliability have high feasibility. If we go to the next slide, please. Here we see the feasibility for different renewable energy technologies, and some of the results I'm going to mention is their comparison with the 6 assessment report. So for example, under the environmental dimension, solar energy was a bit lower to medium feasibility, just because in this case we considered the life cycle assessment, and there's still some environmental issues with the disposal, reuse and recycling of batteries. But what we can also see, for example, is that geothermal energy improved in its feasibility score, and this is due to the reduced negative impact on water quantity and quality due to reinjection techniques and the use of closed loop systems. For hydroelectric power, we use conventional power with large reservoirs or dams, and also generation at existing infrastructure, which is run of river. And we can see some of the main differences with the environmental dimension and also sociocultural, because at least in some of the regions of the world, the big hydros with dams tend to have more conflict. Energy storage, especially pumped storage hydro, has high feasibility. It's one of the most used technologies, and with respects to demand side mitigation, we look specifically at buildings and transport. So while in buildings we look at co-benefits of job creation and reduction of energy poverty and improve indoor comfort, on the side of transportation, we really made an effort to look at global north and global south implications, especially to attend to different poverty and inequality issues. So if we go to the next slide, please. Here we can see some of the regional results for solar PV, where we look, you can see the results for global, Asia, and Central and South America. And here we do have mostly medium and high feasibility, but also for Central and South America, we still have significant gaps for a number of the indicators. If we go to the next slide, please, we have results for hydroelectric power for large dams, also following the regions of IPCC's Working Group 2. which again we see significant knowledge gaps. So that also points to where we need to do more evaluations. And if we move to the next slide, please, as has been mentioned by the previous speakers, we also need enabling conditions. So despite what the feasibility assessment says, we do need governance, institutions, finance and investment, and innovation. Governance, because it can determine the speed of implementation and whether the benefits and costs are equitably distributed. Institutions, which is one of the weakest dimensions to support legislation and policies and in establishing clear regulatory frameworks. I won't go into finance because I know Elizabeth is going to be doing that one. And then innovation is playing a critical role in enabling climate technology progress. I know that later Lucas is going to talk more about artificial intelligence and machine learning because there are some linkages there. So the next slide, please. And just in conclusion, is that there are some highly feasible renewable energy technologies. When you read the chapter, you'll see more of the interlinkages between energy system transitions and other system transitions, such as Helene mentioned, but also between mitigation, adaptation, and sustainable development. And something that we did make sure to look at is how to be consistent with expanding justice and equity, prioritizing local context and the needs of the most vulnerable groups, such as, for example, with transportation and different scale solar energy, such as what Stephen mentioned earlier. When mitigation and adaptation are considered together, we reduce the risk of maladaptation and inequality, and this together with equity and justice should be at the heart of a just energy transition, which then leads us to climate resilient development. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Deborah, for the presentation, all the work on the chapter, and also for the effort made in joining us here today. I hope you feel better soon. So without further ado, I would now like to invite our next speaker, who is Elizabeth Gilmore, who has been leading the investment and finance chapter together with other colleagues, and we would hear more from Elizabeth on the aspects of investment and finance relating to tripling renewable energy. So please, Elizabeth, the floor is yours.
Thank you. So this is a chapter which I co-led with Bjarne Steffen from ETH Zurich. In this chapter, when we think about finance, we asked not just what is what finance, what we currently know about finance, but we took a special look at what the different metrics that are available and what they can tell us. And so we took a look at at 4 key metrics. And so the focus here is on these metrics, what they can tell us, the opportunities that they present for tracking going forward, as well as some of the shortcomings of these methods, of these different metrics, especially in the context of just transitions. And so we start here with one of the main key messages, and this is really sort of the first metric that we present, and this is the overall financial flows going into 4 key renewable energy technologies: solar, onshore wind, offshore wind, and hydro. And this is really one of the most positive figures that we can produce. We've seen a rapid increase in overall financial flows, and year upon year, the statistic that we have estimated for the next year has been an underestimate of the actual realization. As you move from this global metric into more disaggregated and a disaggregated look by region, a different picture starts to emerge. We see strong progress financial flows in some regions, here looking at primarily OECD regions, but also growth in some select emerging economies. However, the picture is much less rosy as we move from those more developed markets into another subset of emerging technologies and also into a set of developing countries where financial flows are still small. What is underpinning a lot of what we're seeing can be explained by the third metric that we investigated. This metric is the cost of capital. And so this goes back to what Helene mentioned earlier. And so when we talk about sort of cost per unit, we continue to see these decreases. And that's what's underpinning a lot of the increase in the financial flows. These technologies are costing less, but they cost less selectively because of differences in cost of capital. And so here we show the cost of capital for different renewable energies in large economies, for solar PV and onshore wind. And so overall, you see that in countries like Germany, France, and Denmark, the cost of capital is very low. And so for these very intensive investments for renewable energy, so for large-scale renewable energy, this really is what's underpinning the growth. When you look at another subset of economies like South Africa, Brazil, you see a cost of capital that is factors higher. So this really puts a brake on those financial flows. But there's something else that you don't see on this figure, and this is the cost of capital in developing countries. And in fact, not only can it be very spotty, it actually is it's just incredibly high. So high, in fact, that this metric loses a lot of its explanatory meaning. And so in these cases, we're really looking more at some of the reasons why these investments are viewed as so risky. Some of this relates to perceptions within investment communities, as well as larger structural macroeconomic conditions. And so here we call for various de-risking opportunities, especially those that could be led by the multilateral development banks, and that they have a role to play here. The final metric that we looked at the diversification within the financial landscape. What we capture here is a certain amount of robustness. So what you would see in a metric like this is that a more diverse financial landscape suggests a robustness in the investment ecosystem. But it also tells us something else. And this is one more place where we really bring in the context of just transition. A lot of where we're seeing this investment is we're seeing it really driven through private sector and through banks. Where this becomes an issue in just transitions is that it can lead to the benefits that would accrue from this renewable energy being concentrated in private sector investments. And within the context of a just transition, these benefits should be more equally shared, and especially shared within the communities where these renewable energies would be most useful. And so in this case, we also make recommendations related to alternative ownership structures, and specifically exploring renewable energy communities where the benefits from these investments will accrue within the communities themselves. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth, and for the work on this chapter. And also it's quite encouraging to see how the chapter and its approach has evolved this year, and we hope to see a continuation of this in the coming year. So thank you very much for that. So now I would like to invite our next speaker, who is Lucas Somavilla, who has led the chapter on governance and innovation together with colleagues. And I would like to invite you, Lucas, to share insights from this chapter. So please, Lucas, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Can you all hear me? Wonderful. Good afternoon, everybody. And thanks to UNFCCC for providing the opportunity to present the chapter here today with you. And thanks to Helen also for the remarks in the sense that we need to start really thinking about system transition and system transformation. And here is where this chapter becomes more relevant in terms of how we can actually move towards designing those innovations that will get us closer to this building cross-sectoral benefits and accelerate the transition at the same time that we pursue the Sustainable Development Goals. So thank you very much for having me today. I'll be brief because we don't have a lot of time, but so this chapter examines the role of digitalization and governance in the context of the energy transition and applies a responsible innovation governance framework to look at some of the interlinkages between digitalization and energy. These technologies resulting from this innovation have potential features that are highly relevant for accelerating the transition. And we look at various different technologies, including from the hardware as well as software. So in the case of hardware, this may include ICT infrastructure, but also things like data centers, robotics, Internet of Things, as well as software applications, including on cloud computing and artificial intelligence with diverse applications across the energy sector. Although digitalization rates vary globally and from country to country, it's pivotal that we start including more assessments on the way that we look at these technologies, because they will start to increase to have a much more important role in how in harnessing the potential for rolling out renewable energy in the sector. So we recognize in the chapter the need for various approaches to assess the benefits, but also to think about the risks that involve on digital technologies in the context of the energy transition. And we present two case studies concretely, one which is a sort of a high-tech global scope of technology, which is looking at artificial intelligence, particularly machine learning, combined with the use of satellite data to map a global rooftop solar potential in the case of the built environment. And this gives us a kind of a flavor of what digitalization can do at a global scope. Then the second case is a much more mature technology that has been rolled out in Africa. This is the case of pay-as-you-go systems. And we'll look at the case of how this technology has been rolled out in the case of Burkina Faso. So in the chapter, we also looked at learnings and lessons from opportunities and challenges when it comes to creating governance mechanisms for digital innovation in the context of the energy transition. We see digitalization already becoming one of the key drivers in the way that these energy systems can be reshaped and transformed in terms of how energy can be assessed, how it can be produced, distributed, and consumed, especially when it comes to renewable energy. We also see that digitalization is very much led, the digital innovation in particular is very much led by high-income countries. And so the progress in terms of publications, patents, policies and regulations is very much focusing on high-income nations. Highlighting the need for more research and more investment also in digital infrastructure in low and middle income regions. There are challenges, of course, and risks associated with these technologies that we owe to recognize, and these are obviously the potential increase in energy demand from computation, as well as associated environmental impacts and the context of the global digital divide, particularly in energy scarce regions like sub-Saharan Africa. There are also biases and potential information asymmetry that can emerge from the training of these technologies, particularly algorithms, in contexts where there is poor data quality and potential contextual mismatches that could create information asymmetry and actually undermine trust and collaboration when it comes to this rollout these technologies. So this is a call for a responsible governance mechanisms that need to be tailored to the specific context. And this is essential if we want to really harness the potential of digitalization in the context of the energy transition at the same time that we're managing risks. So in this chapter, I'm not going to talk too much about it here. but just to give a flavor we created a framework a governance framework to look at core principles that stakeholders need to think about when assessing opportunities and risk and improving governance of these technologies. So we talked about the alignment of common visions and objectives of innovation when it comes to developing digitalization and digital policies. And looked at kind of core dimensions, that is risk management, regulatory factors, institutional factors, and innovation management. And we have provided some problem area definitions as well as guiding questions for the stakeholders to when they assess these technologies. The way that we build this framework we build it in a very general way so that it works as a scaffolding that can be then utilized by different stakeholders in different regions and countries to match their own needs. So in terms of the first case study, which is about using artificial intelligence for rooftop solar capacity expansion, we know that solar PV energy is becoming an important source, a core source of renewable energy. And recent AI-based tools have shed light on how we can utilize some of these technologies to provide robust assessments on predicting even the expected solar PV capacity for individual houses in the built environment, but also for all kinds of buildings. While these AI-based insights work really well in a high data context, they might not work so well in low data context, and we need to be really careful in how do we find the balance in terms of the interpretations that we can do so that we don't create unrealistic or biased information, even harmful predictions for those low data contexts, for example, in the case of Sub-Saharan Africa. In conclusion, we think that while these algorithms insights cannot replace the need for deployment of a solar PV and solar PV infrastructure, they can help reduce uncertainty as well as attract investment opportunities from both private and public sector. So the second case, we look at the last mile connectivity for a pay-as-you-go energy access innovation in Burkina Faso. And this is where CTCN provided the case. So thank you very much, CTCN, for your insights. We see that this company has been working on to try to roll out a pay-as-you-go for creating a solar PV system that harnesses the country's solar potential. But we see that there are challenges associated, particularly when it comes to agriculture and vulnerable populations that might not have access to these basic technologies, like using applications in the phones. We also see that the innovative elements of these projects, it's about understanding that context and providing a contextual adaptation of the pay-as-you-go role model for understanding also the income patterns of the population in Burkina Faso, and so that we can ensure the affordability as well as the accessibility for those that needed this the most. There are some challenges, of course, in terms of the unequal access of these technologies, even to this date. So in cases like in Kenya has worked really well, but in Burkina Faso hasn't worked really well, particularly in rural areas. So how we can actually tap into that gap and really understand it, particularly for marginalized groups, such as women and low-income households. So just to conclude, it's really important that we focus, as much as we focus on rolling out the technology, we also focus on building and strengthening the local capacity, as well as enhancing digital literacy in rural areas so that the population can actually benefit from these technologies. So just to conclude, integrating renewables using digitalization, in the case of smart grids, or using AI combined with GIS mapping, promise a lot of advances for energy management systems and could help stabilize grids and accelerate their adoption if we consider that responsible governance are in place. But we also need to think about that strong national governance and circular economy practice need to be in place so that we ensure that we manage risks when it comes to ICT demand and avoid offsetting potential sustainability gains. We also need to think about how do we advance context-specific decarbonization. So further research is needed in terms of understanding digitalization's role in decarbonization pathways, particularly in sub-Saharan African context. These digital tools are becoming more valuable to mapping renewable energy potential, and they can indeed boost efficiency and create cross-sectoral linkages between water and agriculture, but they cannot replace the need for the physical infrastructure and the investments that are needed, as well as the governance systems that need to be put in place. We owe to develop responsible artificial intelligence use for renewable energy projects and think about how we can collaborate to build the right kind of standards and data privacy, as well as think about the equitable access. So all in all, I think national policies should also work on enhancing digital literacy and promote evidence generation on the question of between energy and digitalization, and mobilize global funding for digital education in low and middle income countries. I'll leave it there, but happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lucas, for the presentation, and not least for all the energy put into preparing the chapters together with colleagues. So thank you very much for that. Now, actually, we are through with our presentations, and I would like to see if there are any questions from the participants who are here. Otherwise, could I invite you, Helene, to join us here at the stage? And I believe we still have Deborah with us online as well, so she's also there to respond to questions on the feasibility assessment. I see we have a question here. I'll give you a microphone. I'll check if this is the right that works. Yes.
Hello. Yeah, I had a question around the issue of cost of capital, and I wanted to find out exactly what the average looks like for sub-Saharan Africa and what specific reasons were accounting for those. Then also, when you show the map on the technologies for solar, you would find that from the earlier years of 2021, the adoption of solar has been dipping through in the developing world, particularly in SSA. Rather than I would anticipate that they should be going up rather. What really is the challenge, or what are your findings underpinning this trend?
Perhaps I'll go directly to you, Elizabeth, to respond, and others can add.
Sure. Thank you so much for those questions. So our cost of capital estimates come from an observatory for cost of capital that was established to a large extent because of the importance of this metric. Now, I don't have the number that you want off the top of my head, so I'm going to take your card. I'm going to make sure that I get you the full data set. But what it reflects is that the estimates for cost of capital, not just in emerging economies, but also a specific subset of economies in developing countries. What we see first is in some cases there's not enough information to estimate this. In other cases, the value that you would calculate is no longer what we would interpret as a reflection of the cost of capital in its most fundamental way. Instead, what we're capturing some level of actual and a lot of perceived risk in the investment community. And so the types of responses that you would have would be different than at the difference in cost of capital between, say, some of the other subset of emerging economies in Germany, for example. And so here you're talking about much more extensive de-risking is really needed to reset that cost of capital. And so here, the multilateral development banks have a substantial role to play by bringing in that low-risk capital. And in that way, we would then expect private capital to be better able to follow. So I hope that answers your first question. We always have some challenges with year upon year in these types of analyses. 1 year. So sometimes what we see as a dip could just simply be the realization of a lot of expansion in the previous year. It can also reflect, though, other parts of the system that have constraints. And so I'm not going to opine too much more on it, but I think some of the reasons why we see differences year upon year and not just always an increasing trend can be that investment is not necessarily continuous. Once you've put in a certain amount of capacity, you may not be doing the same in the next year, but in many cases it also represents other parts of the system that also need to be addressed, for example, transmission.
Thank you very much for that. If I see no further questions, then I would actually just like to turn to you, Deborah, who is with us online, and ask you a question. You have presented to us here today the feasibility assessment and its results from this year's report focusing on renewable energy technologies and how we can move ahead with implementation and scaling up. And I was wondering if you could perhaps share some on how do we use the feasibility assessment more as a policy-making tool, and how can that be used by actors in general? Could you hear me, Deborah? All right.
Sorry.
So
Yes.
just to see how can the feasibility assessment be used by, for example, policymakers at the national level? What is the information generated? How can that be used in practice?
Thank you, Sarah. So when you see the tables that were presented, the smaller circles that I was mentioning on lower feasibility, even though many I did mention were knowledge gaps, especially for the institutional dimension, they were significant barriers. So when you go into the report itself, you'll find more detail, but just in summary, that points to where you need more robust institutions, or where different institutions need to work together, following what Helene emphasized on system transitions, that this is not solely of the energy sector or energy ministries, and that energy ministries also need to work with other ministries within a government. So you have this interinstitutional part, but also that you need the policies and regulations and standards to enable the technologies and the progress that we need by 2030. But not only do you need those policies and regulations, but also the means of implementation. So how can you guarantee the implementation and the transparency of how it's implemented? But then on the other hand, you also have, for example, when I was talking about some of the technologies and in social conflict, that there's quite a few countries around the world that, for example, don't really know how to properly implement the agreement of the 169 of the International Labour Organization on free, prior, informed consent, especially of indigenous populations. So, for example, a country can give you a concession of whatever land for whatever renewable energy source, and they would think it's implicit that then the private sector would have to implement this free, prior, informed consent, while the private sector will say, well, that's the government's duty, and then they won't do it. So it just becomes a checklist on who will do it, because it's a requirement. So how do you really internalize those processes as necessary and not just as a checklist? You know, just how maybe 10 or 15 years ago an environmental impact assessment was merely a checklist. Some of these issues are still part of just a checklist. So it's how do you go beyond that? And then the feasibility assessment really shows where those significant barriers are. So that in itself points policymakers where you need to do the fixes to really enable them. Because when you see the big tables, and especially in the appendix, you'll see that it's probably 2 or 3 indicators that have a problem out of the 20-something of them. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. And perhaps in continuation of this question, if I may ask you, Helene, we speak about tripling renewables? How do we make NDCs more ambitious? We talk about systems approaches, national innovation systems, and how does all this materialize at the national level? And in the report and in this work, we don't focus only on developing countries or specific regions, but also on across countries and at the national level. Perhaps if you could give some examples of, how does this trickles down? How do we address this at the national level? And that could also be in any country.
Yeah, good question. So I think we're seeing different levels of implementation of this type of thinking in different places. If I talk about my own country in the Netherlands, we're seeing that actually a neglect of this infrastructure element is now leading to a slowing down of the renewable energy implementation. And this goes via different processes. And there was a grid congestion because of governments not really investing ahead. Then this grid congestion led to a lot of complaints from companies who could not get new electricity connections, which led to a political call for slowing the energy transition, which led to lowering of policies and lowering political support. So this not having attention to these elements can have repercussions on a much broader level, which are important to take into account. So that as an example of how relevant this is and how important it is to look at the full picture. And I think if I look at some research that some of my colleagues have done more in developing countries, and if the ones who are benefiting basically from implementation of renewable energy are the companies from other countries, the economic consequences locally can actually be that there is a short-term increase in employment, but later on there is barely any jobs anymore and rather low added value to the local economy. Actually, it might even reduce the incentive to have a local energy transition, because if you, for instance, start exporting green hydrogen, you're exporting your valuable resources. So there's economic and social risks, let alone environmental risks, of some of these sort of green energy transitions that we need to take into account, and looking at the full scope of enabling conditions and really investing in all of them and make them conditions for renewable energy and other green investments is very important to sustain the justice in the transitions.
Yes, so I think that's a very important point. There are many benefits and co-benefits, but there are certainly also challenges and risks that needs to be addressed. And perhaps then turning to you, Lucas, and the question of perhaps on artificial intelligence. I mean, there are multiple benefits and potentials, but there are also possible risks. And perhaps if you could speak about something on how less developed countries not only gain access to these technologies, but how can we also make sure that there are not high adverse effects of those?
Thank you very much, Sarah, for that question. Yeah, indeed. As we see these innovations becoming more ubiquitous and deployed across different sectors and systems and across countries, what we call the digital economy, we really need to think about these key dimensions of governance and that need to be in place, as well as the capabilities that need to be based across different stakeholder groups, because if you think about these innovations at the moment, they're primarily sitting within the private sector hands, and I don't think that that's necessarily bad, but if there are no opportunities for opening up these systems, opening up in terms of creating open data systems, of creating capabilities for public sector organizations to learn more about the rollout of these technologies and understand the challenges and opportunities and how to how to create frameworks to regulate them, to steer them in the right direction, then we're moving into a more risky zone where you have particularly Nordic private sector organizations, companies like Google, Amazon, who will always be at the cutting edge of the knowledge of the technologies, but just for their own interest. And I think for in the context of the developing countries, I think there's a lot of potential, but we also need to. I think the public sector needs to take a much more leading role in the way that drives the innovation within their own countries. And I think it also relates to the cost of capital issue. Governments need to really be bold and take the lead and in a way be in the driving seat of the innovation process and do as much consultation and assessments in terms of what are the gaps that are needed to be addressed, and then create those frameworks that allow to empower the public sector to drive the innovation forward. And that, of course, will lead into better AI governance systems and allow for that capacity to be built, to be maintained, and at the same time direct these technologies in the right direction, I would say. Thanks.
Thank you very much, and I think this is also a very good last point to finish our session with. So thank you so much to all of our speakers, to all of the authors who have contributed to the report and to the steering committee, but also to you who are here with us in the room. Thank you very much for joining us. I'd also just like to thank my colleagues back home, Blanche Ting, Paul Riemann and Mohammed Walid Jomni for all their work in getting this report out. So thank you very much to everyone, and it's a great pleasure having you here. Thank you.